Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about the storyline behind the Necrons, Eldar, and the Orcs. This video is intended to provide a very brief, rudimentary introduction to the storyline of the Necrons, Eldar, and the Orcs. We'll start with the Necrons, as they're the most ancient playable race in Warhammer 40,000, being tens of millions of years old. The Eldar and the Orc storyline, interestingly enough, originate because of the Necrons. Now, the Necrons, initially called the Necron tier, were a humanoid race originating on an incredibly irradiated planet. Because of this, they lived short, painful lives. Nevertheless, they were able to develop the technology to escape from their planet and began exploring space in the vicinity. The Necron tier encountered another race called the Old Ones. The Old Ones are sort of the quintessential creator race that most fantasy and sci-fi storylines contain some variation of. The Old Ones were incredibly technologically advanced and were essentially immortal. They were also able to travel through the galaxy through a system called the Webway, which I'll intentionally oversimplify by saying it's a network of wormholes separate from the warp. The Necron tier propositioned the Old Ones to reveal the secrets of immortality to them in an effort to escape their short, painful existence, and the Old Ones refused. This led the Necron tier to wage war against the Old Ones, which they quite unsurprisingly lost. Relegated back to their planet, the Necron tier again turned to the stars and discovered another race called the C'tan. The C'tan, unlike any other race, were entirely energy-based and fed off the energy of the stars. The C'tan told the Necron tier that they too had tried to defeat the Old Ones and lost. Through this shared misery, the two groups allied with each other, and the Necron tier built physical bodies for the C'tan out of living metal, which is a technology the Necron tier had developed for themselves, so the C'tan could manifest in physical forms. After this process, the C'tan convinced the Necron tier that they too could transition to these bodies made of living metal to escape their irradiated existence. This was trick, and as the Necron tier completed the transformation from their mortal bodies to the new living metal constructs, they discovered they had lost their souls, and most, with the exception of the Necron tier lords, had lost their free will. The C'tan had tricked the Necron tier and fed on the energy of their souls as they escaped from their mortal bodies. The Necron tier, now called Necrons, resembled humanoid robots constructed of living metal and had become essentially a mindless slave army at the command of the C'tan. The C'tan and their new Necron army waged war against the Old Ones, referred to as the War in Heaven. The C'tan were able to defeat the Old Ones, but not before the Old Ones created two new races to utilize as their own weapons to counter the Necrons. These two races were the Eldar and the Krork, which is the predecessors of the Orks. As the Old Ones were defeated, the C'tans fed on the energy of their souls, and they began competing with each other, and the few Necron lords who had retained their free will were able to exploit this division, and they turned on the C'tan. The Necrons were able to fracture the physical bodies of the C'tan into many shards, and they trapped the shards in vaults to keep them isolated from each other. The vast armies of the Necrons were still essentially soulless, mindless robots, but were now at least under the control of the various Necron lords, rather than the deceptive C'tan. The Necron lords had no interest in fighting the newly created Eldar and Orcs, and knew that with their immortal living metal bodies they could simply wait them out and allow their new competitors to run their course and die out on their own. The Necrons built tomb worlds and went into hibernation. The primary leader of the Necrons, known as the Silent King, left the galaxy, headed into empty space, in a self-imposed exile to repent for what he had allowed the C'tan to do to his people. However, the Silent King has returned to the galaxy after allegedly encountering the Tyranids on their way toward the Milky Way galaxy. Without going into too much detail about the Tyranids, they are the only race in Warhammer 40k that originated from outside our galaxy, and the Silent King knew they posed an immense threat to the galaxy as a whole. The Silent King returned and is reawakening Tomb Worlds in an attempt to counter the Tyranid invasion. Of course, many of the Tomb Worlds, being millions of years old, have been colonized by Imperial or other forces, and the awakening armies of mindless killer robots from the depths of their crypts tends to lead to some hardships for everybody involved. Now, the Eldar and the Orcs, created by the Old Ones as weapons to fight the Satan, are in many ways the yin to the other's yang. The Eldar are essentially space elves and exhibit the typical ego and arrogance associated with most elven races throughout various other fantasy and sci-fi stories. The Orcs, on the other hand, are the typical brutish barbarian race that take pleasure in nothing other than fighting. Both races are psychic, the Eldar exceptionally so, but I'd call the Orcs passively psychic rather than actively. They do have individual psykers capable of utilizing the forces of the warp to smite their foes, like psykers from other forces. However, the entire race is collectively psychic as well. Without knowing it, the more orcs that believe something is true, the more true it becomes through their collective passive psychic abilities. For example, orcs collectively believe that red vehicles are faster than vehicles of different colors. And because so many of them believe it, the red vehicles actually are faster. Another example would be the orcs' technology as a whole. Any other race would consider their weapons and vehicles to be extremely ramshackle and would almost certainly not be able to get them to work. However, because the orcs believe their weapons and vehicles will work well, they do actually work well. Now, an orc can't pick up a literal brick and begin shooting bullets out of it because he believes it's a gun, but this ability can be used to sort of plug some holes in storylines and has sort of given the orcs a little bit of comic relief for the game as a whole. As I said, the orcs live to fight and are just as happy fighting amongst themselves as anything else, and it takes an exceptionally strong war boss to unite clans of orcs to achieve anything of consequence. Additionally, orcs actually procreate through spores rather than the more typical means, making them more of a fungi technically than anything else. Planetary defense forces could successfully eradicate an orc invasion, only to later suffer the consequences of a second invasion after the spores left behind create an entirely new generation just looking for a fight. Returning to the Eldar, they are very actively psychic, so much so that many of their powerful psykers can see the future, though they see many possible futures and aren't necessarily certain which actions will lead to which future. In the void left by the defeat of the Satan and the hibernation of the Necrons, the Eldar were able to expand and conquer the galaxy many millions of years prior to the rise of the Imperium of Man, using the webway created by the Old Ones. However, after their success, the Eldar grew bored, and without wars to satisfy their need for stimulation, began falling to acts of excess and depravity in all forms. Without any worthy rivals to their supremacy in the galaxy, the Eldar fell deeper and deeper into depravity, until there was literally blood running down the streets of their worlds from sacrifices, tortures, and depraved sexual acts, among others. Additionally, some Eldar who were so exceptionally depraved hid in the webway to conceal their unfathomable acts for fear of being judged. As bad as the activities of the Eldar worlds were, it's crazy to think that what these Eldar were doing was so bad that they felt they had to hide it from the rest. After falling deeper and deeper into darkness, some Eldar psykers began seeing the unsustainability of their ways and foretelling the doom of the Eldar race. These Farseers and their followers began leaving their worlds on expansive world-sized ships called craft worlds. Shortly thereafter, the Eldar race did meet its doom, as foretold by these powerful psykers. If you remember the four Chaos Gods, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, you'll remember that each of these entities gets their power from the acts of mortal beings. Each time a man kills another man, Khorne gains a fraction of power, for example. Now, the depravity of the Eldar race had fallen into is actually responsible for the birth of the Chaos God Slaanesh. The power from the excess, lust, hedonism, and just general depravity the Eldar had been committing had coalesced in the warp and resulted in the explosive birth of Slaanesh. This explosive event was the doom of the Eldar race that the Farseers had foretold, and ripped the Eldar race apart, save for the more puritanical groups that had already fled on the craft worlds and those who had been hiding in the webway. Prior to the birth of Slaanesh, the soul of a fallen Eldari would be reborn, but now Slaanesh feasts on the souls of the fallen Eldar before they can be reborn, and as such the Eldar are a dwindling race. The craft world Eldar collect the souls of their fallen comrades in soul stones to prevent Slaanesh from devouring them, and are prized objects crucial to the survival of the race as a whole. Sometimes, in times of great need, the Eldar are forced to transfer the souls of their fallen into wraith constructs to fight alongside the ever-thinning Eldar forces. However, this is done as a last resort, as each wraith construct struck down releases the soul of its pilot for Slaanesh to destroy. The Eldar who had been hiding their heinous acts in the webway are now referred to as the Dark Eldar, or Drukhari, as they have been able to maintain the course they set for themselves upon without fear of reprisal from Slaanesh, and continue to torture, murder, and mutate those who encounter them during their various raids of real space. The Dark Eldar have been forced to shun Psykers, however. As you may remember, Psykers channel the power of the warp, the realm of chaos gods. As such, the Dark Eldar cannot risk the tendrils of the warp sneaking into their realm in the webway and allowing Slaanesh to break into their dark bastion. I've intentionally left out many intricacies of the actually four playable races that I've just covered in this video, and I currently have no plan to dive deeper into specific lore-oriented content. If any of this has piqued your interest, there are multiple other YouTube channels devoted almost entirely to the lore of Warhammer 40,000, and I'd suggest checking those out. In the future, after covering the basic premise of Warhammer 40k, I intend to branch out into more gameplay and crafting-oriented videos rather than lore. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments or any ideas for future videos, anything you'd like more information on, please comment down below. Like, subscribe, tell a friend. See you around.